Howdy folks, hope you all had a great weekend, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. Before we crack on, because there's a fair amount to actually cover this week, it's time for a quick word from today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by the one product I am always happy to keep recommending, the best password manager on the planet, Nordpass, which you can get by going to nordpass.com/jingles and using code JINGLES, as well as generating unique, completely unguessable passwords for you at the click of a button, checking the health of any passwords that you have, and monitoring the dark web for any hint of any data breaches that may have compromised your data. They've also just introduced a brand new privacy feature at absolutely no extra cost: email masking. Anytime you sign up for any online goods or services and are required to supply an email address, which, let's face it, covers about 100% of all cases these days, rather than supplying your actual genuine email address and opening yourself up to all kinds of data harvesting, marketing spam and potentially phishing scams, Nordpass will now give you the option of supplying a fake disposable email address instead. This keeps your personal email address safe from unwanted exposure, keeps your personal information secure from threats, and you can decide whether you want to have emails forwarded to your real email address anytime you want. Choice is yours. All of this at no additional cost, along with all of the other benefits of using Nordpass as your password manager and secure data vault. And you can get it by heading over to nordpass.com/jingles and using code JINGLES at checkout. And if you try it and decide that it's not for you, although I'm pretty sure you're going to like it, it's all covered by Nordpass's no questions asked 30-day guarantee. That's nordpass.com/jingles and use code JINGLES at checkout. First thing I wanted to talk about this week. I'm not actually 100% sure I haven't already raised this in a previous video. I can't remember, but either way, it's really funny, so it's worth repeating. So, as many of you are probably aware, there's a new Star Wars game coming out from Ubisoft at the end of the month, Star Wars Outlaws, and its unique selling point is that it's the world's first open-world Star Wars game. Oh, but what about Star Wars Galaxies? That was open world. Well, yeah, but it wasn't open. For a start, it was an MMO. And it wasn't really open world in the sense that people mean these days. We're talking about a Ubisoft-style open world game. Now, that kind of raises red flags in and of itself, because Ubisoft really stopped caring or trying around about the time they published Far Cry 5, where that sort of thing's concerned. So people were understandably skeptical, and the skepticism wasn't helped by the first gameplay trailer that Ubisoft pushed out, which looked kind of janky. You know, NPCs that paid no attention whatsoever to the player character, janky animations, janky special effects, and for some bizarre reason didn't show any of the open world stuff. Which, you know, considering that's the game's unique selling point, you'd think it'd be the kind of thing that Ubisoft would be keen to show off, which begged the question, why are they not showing it off? What are they so ashamed of that they're not showing off the game's unique selling point in a video specifically designed to showcase why you might want to get this game? And the stuff that they are showing off doesn't look good. So, yeah. I mean, it was either a case that Ubisoft had something to hide, or they're idiots. Although there's no reason why both of those things cannot be true at the same time. So, yeah, that didn't generate the hype that Ubisoft were probably expecting. However, more recently, they released a sort of test version of the game to games journalists. Now, straight away, this does raise its own red flags, because, how can we put this? It's not like anybody really trusts most game journalists' reviews of games anymore, because they're so easily bought. And this isn't a conspiracy theory or anything. It's been proven over and over and over again. One particular example that springs to mind, although by no means the only one, although possibly one of the earliest examples of just how obvious it was becoming that favourable reviews were being bought by the publishers, comes from a game called, you might not even remember this, it's a 23-year-old game, right, 2007, that's how long this shit's been going on. A game called Kane and Lynch, Dead Men. I don't know if you remember the game, not important. But it came out to generally reviews. I mean, it wasn't a bad game, but there was absolutely nothing great about it either. Generally, the reviews were in the 60 to 70% range. I can sort of vaguely remember playing it and then thinking, yeah, it's fine, I suppose, and then got bored after about an hour and uninstalled it. It was that kind of game. Nothing specifically wrong with it, but there was absolutely nothing to get excited about. And when GameSpot reviewed it, that's more or less exactly what their reviewer said. I think he gave it something like a 67% score. And that's more or less exactly what it deserved. And that would have been fine, and it wouldn't have made any headlines whatsoever, except the publisher, I think it was Eidos Interactive at the time, were spending lots of advertising money on GameSpot promoting the game, and they were not pleased at a 67% review. So they started leaning on the editor, threatening to pull their advertising money. And so the editor started leaning on the journalist who wrote the review, asking him to rewrite it and change the score. And the journalist, to his credit, refused. And so they fired him. Now, remember, this was 23 years ago, and it's hard to claim that things have gotten better since then. There have been a number of high-profile examples of, and it's usually the fairly major game review websites, places like IGN, GameSpot, and so on and so on. The kind of places that do rely heavily on advertising revenue, where people just don't trust their reviews anymore. So it is with some trepidation when I heard the news that games journalists, including a lot from the major review websites, had been having a go of a playable version of Star Wars Outlaws, and they were feeling generally favourable about it. I mean, to put this in perspective, nobody was raving about Star Wars Outlaws and claiming it was the next big thing, but nobody was saying it was shit either. Certainly not in the way that people had been criticising the first gameplay trailer, which did look kind of shit. However, while I really do hope that Star Wars Outlaws is a good game, because it's certainly the next thing on my radar, and at the end of the month, I'm almost certainly going to get it, and I'm probably going to be playing it, and I've got my fingers crossed, because it's Ubisoft. They, like I said, they really stopped trying after Far Cry 5. Although some people might say they stopped trying as far back as Assassin's Creed Odyssey, but it's been a while. So I'm hoping it's going to be good. I mean, it doesn't have to be great, it just has to not suck. And all of these reviews were saying it really doesn't suck. It's not bad at all. But, there's that seed of skepticism there because games journalists. But then I looked a bit closer, and I'm suddenly inclined to believe what the journalists are saying. Because if you actually look at their reviews, not all of them, but a common thread amongst several of the reviews is that it doesn't feel like a Ubisoft game. And that's the reason why it doesn't suck. Remember, it is a Ubisoft game. That's kind of the point. Imagine if you're Ubisoft, right, and you've just given a press version of the game to a bunch of journalists to play, and the best thing they can say about your game is that it doesn't feel like one of your games. Now, I realise it is possible that this is the line they've been fed by their paymasters at Ubisoft, but it's not likely, is it? I mean, first, nobody at Ubisoft's that smart, and I doubt that there's a marketing director at Ubisoft who's brave enough to risk his career by getting people to say that a game is good because it doesn't feel like a game that they made. So I'm cautiously optimistic, let's just say, because I am, despite everything, looking forward to Star Wars Outlaws. I mean, I do like me some Star Wars, and I do like open world games if they're done well. Grand Theft Auto, for example, Red Dead Redemption, and more recently, the Horizon series, both the original one, Zero Dawn, and the, well, it's not exactly new, but it's newish to the PC, Forbidden West. The thing is, of course, what all of these titles have in common is they're not Ubisoft games, because Ubisoft haven't done a good open-world game since, well, I think most people would agree, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Although I do have a soft spot for Far Cry 5, but everything that they've churned out since then has basically just been open-world, by-the-numbers Ubisoft shovelware. Far Cry 6 was an absolute disaster. Assassin's Creed Valhalla was, well, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good either. So, yeah, cautiously optimistic, I think probably sums it up best. 3 weeks to release. I guess we'll find out sooner rather than later. While we're on the subject of publishers buying good reviews, though, while there absolutely have been some fairly high-profile cases of publishers doing exactly that, they are usually just a little bit more subtle about it. Such as, for example, applying pressure by threatening to pull their advertising money in the case of Kane and Lynch, Dead Men, that happened with GameSpot 23 years ago. But they do have other more subtle tricks in their toolbox to influence review scores beyond the blatant just outright buying reviews, because, you know, if they get found out, that really does come back to bite them in the arse. And also the kind of financial pressure that they brought to bear on GameSpot 23 years ago. But they do have other means at their disposal, and one of the most common tactics that they use is short review times. There was a survey done of games journalists just this year, asking them how much lead time would they prefer to have before writing a review on a game. And the vast majority of cases, the answer came back 3 weeks, although almost 20% wanted 4 weeks to get to grips with the game before they were forced to write a review on it. And that seems fair. Although obviously it depends on the type of game. If you're looking at something like a 2D platformer that you can finish in a week, then you only need a week. But if you're looking at something like Star Wars Outlaws, you know, a huge sprawling open world single player story based adventure game, a week is just not enough time. I mean, can you imagine trying to do a review of Grand Theft Auto 5 in a week? It would just be impossible. And of course the game developers are counting on exactly this, because the average review time that they get these days is 1 week. So why is this important, aside from not being able to fully get to grips with the game, which a lot of the time is what the publishers are counting on, particularly when it comes to live service games, like, for example, Skull and Bones or Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, where people didn't really have time to play through to the end game and find out that there basically wasn't any end game, so none of that could be included in the reviews because the reviews have to go out on the day of release. In many cases, the publishers refuse to allow the reviews to go out ahead of release because they don't want negative reviews affecting day one sales. I had some experience of this myself with World of Warships, where community contributors were given access to ships often a couple of weeks prior to them going on sale while they were still in the testing and development stage. And in many cases, some of these ships were absolute stinkers. There was absolutely no way we could possibly recommend that anybody spend their hard-earned money on them. And we'd say so, which of course negatively impacted the sales of the new premium ships that Wargaming wanted everybody to buy, and they were very, very upset with this, so much so that they completely changed the way that we were allowed to talk about anything that we were given early access to. By which, of course, I mean we just weren't allowed to talk about anything that we were given early access to. Not until the ship had already gone on sale. In fact, in one case, I think it was one of the German aircraft carriers, can't remember specifically which one, but the ship that we were reviewing was actually not bad. In fact, we would have been entirely happy to recommend it, and the preview videos that we did on the ship said more or less exactly this. And then the ship went on sale and it was not the ship that we had been reviewing. I mean, it had the same name, it looked the same, but its parameters had been changed, and it absolutely sucked. So we were the ones left looking like idiots. Wargaming came out with the old damage control story, of course. Oh, yeah, based on your feedback, we made some change. What, based on our feedback, you made it worse? But there wasn't enough time for us to get you the new preview build out, so yeah, the changed version is the one that went on sale. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I bet you are really sorry about that. You tricked a whole bunch of people into buying a ship that sucks based on our previews that said it was good. I'll bet you're really sorry about that. You see, there's ways and means of getting around it without actually going to the probably illegal step of buying reviews. They've got all kinds of tips and tricks in their toolbox. And of course, you know, if you give people just 1 week to review a game, which ensures that they have absolutely no time whatsoever to get to the end game and find out that there isn't any end game, people want to get the reviews out on day one. They can't get them out any earlier because you forbid them from doing so. But if they don't get the video review out on day one, then they get scooped by their competitors. So there's a lot of pressure to just make do with the 1 week that you give them. Because most of these review websites do count on advertising revenue, and you don't even have to threaten to pull your advertising revenue unless you get a good review. You just give them 1 week to get a review done, and then if they don't publish what is almost guaranteed to be an incomplete review on the day of release, they lose advertising revenue because everybody looking for a review on the game goes to the websites that are publishing incomplete reviews on day one of release. This sort of thing is kind of what happened with, what was the name of that? I just mentioned it. Suicide Squad killed the Justice League. Because people only had a week to play it, they didn't realise that there wasn't actually any end game in it. A lot of the initial reviews weren't that bad. And it was only after the game had been out a few weeks and word of mouth got around that there's nothing to do. It's just the same shit over and over and over. And fingers started being pointed at all the review websites saying, oh, clearly you're in the pocket of the publisher, when that isn't necessarily the case. It's just that extremely short review deadlines and pressure, and the publishers know exactly what they're doing here, result in journalists only really being able to review the parts of the games that you want them to review and not having enough time to get to the parts of the games that you'd prefer they didn't have time to review. Speaking of game-related stuff, however, that people have had time to review, the Borderlands movie's out. It's not doing well. Amongst the many red flags associated with the Borderlands movie, including but not limited to casting Kevin Hart as Roland. Don't get me wrong, I like Kevin Hart, I think he's really, really funny. But that's kind of the problem. The character that he plays is not supposed to be. Right, Roland, the soldier, not the comic relief. Claptrap, yes. Dr. Tannis, yes. Tiny Tina, yes. Roland, no. So why would you cast Kevin Hart as Also, I noted with some amusement, okay, if I'm being honest, a lot of amusement, that when Gearbox Studios, in defense of the movie, come out and say, forget everything you know about the Borderlands game and just try to give the movie a chance, oh, that's not a good sign. Also, bizarre choice of director. The movie was directed by Eli Roth. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Eli Roth, although you should probably be aware of where he got his start. He started off making what was basically torture porn horror movies. Movies like Hostel, The Green Inferno, things like that. Basically, Eli Roth is known for making and starring in gratuitously violent movies, like almost cartoonish levels of blood, gore, and violence. Which is fine, because you could argue that Borderlands as a game series is also gratuitously violent. And yeah, it kind of is. It's part of the humour associated with the games. But the Borderlands movie is rated PG-13. So why would you pick Eli Roth to direct a PG-13 movie? Well, the reviews are in. It's not been doing well. At one point, on the day of release, its review aggregate on Rotten Tomatoes was 0%. Although it soon went up to 9% and then dipped back down again to 7%. At the moment, it's currently sitting at an average Rotten Tomatoes score of 10%, which is not good. That is spectacularly awful. It's been reviewing so badly. I'm actually curious now. I mean, just how bad can it be? I mean, I'm not curious enough to actually go and sit in the cinema to watch it, but I've no doubt that within a couple of weeks it'll be available on streaming. And I have a sort of morbid curiosity about just how bad it can possibly be. Has anybody seen it, by the way? If you've actually seen the Borderlands movie, do let me know in the comments what you thought. I mean, is it as painfully bad as all the reviews would appear to suggest? Or did you actually enjoy it? And if you did enjoy it, did you enjoy it because it's as painfully bad as all the reviews would suggest? Because, you know, that's also a thing. My friend Eddie and I loved watching bad movies. You know, there's a lot of entertainment to be had from watching bad movies. In fact, Red Letter Media, I don't know if you follow them on YouTube, they've made a career out of watching bad movies, and some of them are so bad, they are good. Is Borderlands 2 that kind of movie? Is it so bad it's good? Oh, there's another channel, Jason Brandt, So Bad It's Good. They do the same thing. Or is it just bad? Is it so bad it's not even amusing? Let us know in the comments if you have actually been to the cinema and paid good money to watch the Borderlands movie and what you thought of it. I'm not going to be holding my breath waiting for your comments because it's only made $4 million on its opening weekend out of a $120 million budget. So there's not that many people went to see it, but at least somebody must have. Anyway, if you count yourself amongst that lucky number, let us know in the comments. While we're on the subject of games that are getting made into movies, this one's really weird. So I don't know how many of you are aware of a game. I think it's being developed by Redemption Road Studios. It's called Kingmakers. Now, you might not recognize the name, but you probably have maybe seen a couple of gameplay trailers on YouTube. It's the game where you go back in time and fight medieval knights and storm castles with modern weaponry. At one point, I think you get to drive a tank. And there's lots of video footage of you driving around on a motorbike with an M16 or some kind of AR-15 variant, just mowing down knights and footmen. It looks fun. But it doesn't even have a release date yet. In fact, it's only even due to go into early access at some point this year. You can wishlist it on Steam, but at the moment, it doesn't really look like anything but a glorified tech demo rather than an actual game. So, a game that hasn't been released, doesn't have a release date, doesn't even have a firm date for when it's due to go into early access, just at some point this year. And it's already got a movie deal. The movie rights have been snapped up by a company called Story Kitchen. I'd never heard of them, but apparently they were one of the financiers of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie. And they've announced plans to make movies out of Dredge, the indie game, a television series based on the Disco Elysium game, and animated series based on Vampire Survivors and Tomb Raider. It's also got the rights to things like Just Cause. And they've snapped up the movie rights to Kingmakers based on nothing more than a couple of YouTube videos of somebody taking down a castle in an M1 Abrams and somebody driving around on a motorbike gunning down knights and medieval footmen. But it's not that stupid if you think about it. I mean, I love the Evil Dead movies, in particular Evil Dead 2, which was a classic, but I've got a massive soft spot for Evil Dead 3 as well. Army of Darkness, or depending on the title that it was using that particular week, Medieval Dead. And Evil Dead 3 is basically just what would happen if somebody went back in time with a chainsaw and a shotgun. And that doesn't make it a bad movie. On the contrary, it's hilarious. And so, what would happen if somebody went back in time with an M1 Abrams, an Apache attack helicopter, and an arsenal of rocket launchers and machine guns? I would actually watch that. It would be nice if they could actually get around to making the game that the movie's supposed to be based on first, because I do actually quite like the sound of that as a game concept, but I'm not actually that fussy. Game, movie, whatever comes first, I'd be perfectly willing to give either of them a try. Just based on the concept alone, they both have the potential to be very entertaining. They could both suck, of course. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. And that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you something to have a laugh about, something to have a think about, and maybe something to talk about in the comments. I do hope you all had a good weekend. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.